That's the problem with ego, is that the ego's always got some sort of ulterior motive that's going on. You're not really doing it. You're not fully doing it when the ego's involved, because the ego's concerned about, how do I look? Are people going to like this? Will people accept me? Will this be brilliant? Will this be shit? Will this, like, it's concerned with all of that stuff. And while all of that stuff is going on, that's all energy. That's all an incredible amount of our physical and mental energy that's going into those thoughts that could be placed on the thing itself.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles,
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
Another day, another episode, and we're getting into it. We're talking about some creative stuff. That's what we do. I don't know if I want to tell everyone the title that we're kind of working with, because I feel like it might change over the course of this. But I will say that this is going to be an investigative thing. We've kind of come across an idea. We want to look into it. We want to investigate it. We want to kind of see how maybe it plays in. And at the end of the day, I think this is both to help us kind of be more creative, pursue more of what we're trying to do, be open more to doing what we're trying to do or discover. And at the same time, as we do that for ourselves, share that with everyone here listening. And maybe you guys agree, maybe you don't, maybe you can add something to the conversation, of course. And this is what we're up to today. We're going to be talking a little about kind of like getting that ego out of the way, this ego, and how does that maybe play a part in all of this? And that's what I got. So what do you think, Evan? What do you want to add?
Yeah. I'll just say sort of our working title for this, which could change when you clicked on this, you'll know what we ended up calling it, and maybe it is. But our working title for this one is disappearing into creativity, and this one I'll just sort of say where, Brandon, you were mentioning some certain things about what are we listening to when we're creating, and it's easy to, like, as a filmmaker, it's like, okay, we're going to make sure we get these shots and like these systems, these mechanics of just how to just do things a certain way, but there's not necessarily creativity involved with that. And then I recently watched an episode of a fantastic show on Netflix called Chef's Table, where they profile all these great, incredible chefs from all over the world. And there was this one with this woman who's this Korean woman who's like a Buddhist nun. And she was talking about how she mentioned at one point how there's no creativity when there's ego. When the ego's involved, creativity disappears. And it was one of those things that when I heard it and read the subtitles that were happening there, but I saw it and it felt so refreshing, while at the same time felt like something that I have known forever. I find that sometimes those pieces of perennial wisdom have that kind of effect, like they're ageless, like they never fall out of fashion, like they carry on and on and on and on, and they feel so kind of novel when you hear them, but at the same time there's always this quality of, I knew that. I don't know how I knew that, but I knew that, and you're like just reminding me of something that I'd maybe forgotten. So that's sort of in terms of setting the table for this one, what I wanted to leave out here. So
all right. Well, this was kind of like, we did have a discussion before this, and I said a whole lot and then you said a bunch, but at the end of the day, I think that kind of little bit of information, that thing you came across, this whole thing is no creativity with ego, right? Basically. So I want to ask you, what about that rings true for you?
Okay. That's the big question there, isn't it? Um, the I guess in some ways it's kind of like, let's talk about ego first and foremost. Let's talk about this thing called ego. I think it's something that a lot we have a more sophisticated understanding now generally as people. I think it used to be something that and I think to a large extent some people do, but like we used to have these expressions of, oh, they've got a big ego, and we still say that kind of stuff. And it's this statement of, oh, somebody's really full of themselves, somebody thinks really highly of themselves or whatever. And I think that we're collectively we're starting to understand the more nuanced, deeper understanding of what ego is, which is, it's essentially the image of yourself, the idea that you have of yourself, which is made up of a bunch of ideas. You're kind of made up of a bunch of experiences and things you've learned and knowledge you've acquired and memories and projections. And that's all sort of makes up the person that you are, attached with the label that is your name. So it's a vast and very complex thing, our egos. The problem with the ego, I mean, there's numerous problems with their egos, namely kind of getting involved in things it doesn't have really great business being involved with, which is one of those things is creativity. Because the ego is essentially comprised of things that are already known. It's stuff that is already known to you. And as we've discussed many times on the show before, creativity also only occurs in the unknown space. So I hope that the sort of the logic of the step-by-step kind of reveals like, oh, okay, so creativity can only happen from the unknown. The ego is created out of only what is known, and so it cannot actually step into that space of unknown. It can make stuff, like it can make stuff, it can contrive things, right? But it cannot create things. Mm. Creation comes from somewhere else. Mm. Does that answer?
Yeah, that's
question?
Great. That's wonderful. Actually, no, that's wonderful because, you could say, yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to continue to rephrase that, which is like creativity is only possible when the ego is out of the way or removed, but it's like the unknown, you can only explore the unknown when you let go of the known.
Yeah.
Or you let go of at least what you think you know, so you could go into what you don't know. So in a lot of ways, the ego is kind of, it's like almost a prison cell to what you think you know. And that's why part of it is you need to be able to step outside of yourself in a way, or your identity, so that you can find out what's possible beyond what you think you are. And I think what's interesting about the ego, what this is bringing up for me, is that it doesn't mean that it's not true or accurate, what you think you know about yourself, but it might mean that it's not the whole picture. It might mean that it's just a very small part of what you know of yourself. Yeah. And so in some ways, creativity is about expansion and expansion of self. And in some ways, one thing that came up for me, I'm trying to put this thought forward in the most clear way. And I just said about 3 ideas at once. So let me just stop and start again. Pride has it's two sides of a sword. It has a good side and a bad side. To be prideful, to be arrogant, this is a deadly sin. It's a bad thing. It's destructive. Yeah. It's really not good. It's not healthy, and it will lead you down a bad path. Arrogance, all sorts of stuff. But pride in honor, pride in care, pride in taking care and putting effort into, and premium quality pride, that is honorable. That's a good part of pride, right? So there's pride in your team, your family, what you build, your creative project, all of that. That's good. So I think like ego has this kind of tight knit relationship with pride. And so I think you can maintain a certain amount of pride in the part of you that you maybe like, maybe the part of you that you've kind of built up to this point, but recognizing that that's not all you are, that there might be something beyond that. So yes, that might be true, but you don't need to cling to that like that's all you are. You can let go of it and see, maybe there's something more or something else which might even be better than what you think you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you brought that into the picture. I'm reading a book right now by a guy named Thomas Merton, and Merton. Let's enunciate a little bit. A book by Thomas Merton, and in one of his chapters, he said something to the effect of, "Pride is one of the heaviest of burdens to carry." Because it's pride can lead us to make very stupid decisions. It can close us off. It can certainly close us off from it can certainly close us off from creativity. So just to I don't know, maybe bring this into more of an example of how this looks in action, right? So let's talk about a group of artists that we are quite intimate with, having been in that world and being of this group. Actors.
Yeah.
Like many artists, like we would say, like, oh, they've got pretty big egos and stuff like that. But actors are an interesting bunch, and I'll speak just for myself, but in my own experience as an actor, in training and in auditioning and performing, all of it, there can be a great deal of ego and pride that is caught up in that. And what that can lead you to do is to make really dumb decisions, which is essentially you try and control everything that you're doing all the time. You're trying to perform and control everything that's going to happen, which you can't. It's a futile thing to go about. But more importantly, it keeps you from actually really exploring and discovering something, right? Because these things, and sometimes it doesn't always come into play, but a lot of the time it comes into play where you go, oh, okay, well, at this moment, I'm going to do this thing because I think that will be really impactful on people if I do this. This is a contrived notion, a premeditated action of something that you're going to do, and it's going to wow the audience. This is the ego, and it's you can call it clever, you can call it interesting perhaps, but you can't necessarily call that creative, right? Because it's a manipulation. That kind of thing is a manipulation of yourself, and it's a manipulation of the audience to a certain extent. And some people like to take that route, and that's all the power to you. Go for it. But for myself as an actor, what I've begun to find is what great actors do, which is coming in with this deep sense of not knowing, and a complete letting go of all of those notions, because I think that they understand that that's going to keep them from that sense of aliveness, that sense of presence, that sense of that's going to actually give their work a shot at being something of quality, I guess. I don't know how other, and so I don't know how to put it in any other way. And it's one of those interesting things where it's like the more you let go of that ego, the greater the greater your quality, the quality of your work and your life tends to take. Tends to go in that direction. where, you know, which is, it's funny because there's no faking that thing. There's no faking that letting go that is required to make that happen. But it's interesting that it's the outcome that your ego is trying to create, you know, but your ego is trying to construct it. It's trying to manipulate it and force it to happen. Right. But you can't force that thing to occur. I said a lot, so.
All good things. Let me go back to the one where you mentioned kind of something of creating something of quality. And I think that this is kind of a good way to put it, because things that are contrived, things that are usual, things that are premeditated, they're not creative, they're almost obvious. They aren't really quality. They're kind of subpar, you know, they're barely acceptable, you know, and I think that there's a lot of people who kind of they do work that is barely acceptable, not because there's anything wrong with them, but because they never open themselves up to true creativity. And they wonder like why they're not kind of getting the part or making an impact with the performance, you know, and stuff like that. And I think it's because, well, you're choosing something that's barely acceptable, and it is acceptable, but it's barely acceptable. And what happens is it's one of those things. It's like, it's not really quality because, you know, as an audience member experiencing it or a witness of it, you're kind of like, yeah, you know, okay, like kind of saw that coming. Like it's kind of, you know, and when it happens, there's nothing really,
there's nothing surprising about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't quite feel profound. You know, there's there's a quality of profoundness in creativity. It's like profound even to you when you stumble across it. You know, I might say that creativity is finding an option when all the obvious ones are not available or are not acceptable. You know, it's that option you find when, you know, the obvious things are not acceptable and or they're just not available. You know, like when people are very controlling, right? They have a kind of a postulate that they believe there's a certain number of outcomes. People who are very controlling have a very difficult time with creative people, because creative people are able to think of options that manipulators haven't thought out. They have ways of navigating beyond cliche obvious options, and they are very adaptable, you know. So in some ways, when you submit to the unknown, when you let yourself kind of be in a place of like, I don't know what's going to happen, but whatever happens, I'm going to find a way. I don't need to know what that way is, but when it happens, when I get to that bridge, I will find the way to cross it, or I will find a way to get across, or I will find a way, you know, is this kind of thing that's very exciting to watch someone who has that mentality, right? And I think creativity, it asks of you to have a mentality, and ego, unfortunately, stifles this mentality because it's very controlling. It's very predictable. It's very obvious. It's like, I need to know the way before I get there. That's what ego wants, right? But creativity goes, we'll get there, but we don't need to know how. We think we know how, but if anything goes to shit, if anything goes off, we'll find another way. Don't know what that way is, but when we'll get there, we'll assess, we'll make a decision, you know, and that's truly exciting, because if you think about watching, say, a movie or a performance or to whatever it is they're trying to do.
Oh,
yeah.
You want to, sorry, you cut out for just a few seconds. Can you reprise that?
Well, I probably recorded all of it, but just to sum it up, I think the thing is having a path that you think you're going to walk is ego. Getting to a place where you come to an obstruction or something that stops you, and then you find a way, based on responding to that, not something you planned on, but just by dealing with it, that's creativity. And I think creativity is a certain kind of confidence. It's a certain kind of letting go of needing to know and embracing your ability to deal with it when you get there, you know. But it's also, creativity doesn't mean that you just go, I'll just throw it all to the wind and just figure it out. Like that's not what it means. But it means that I have creativity to call on when I need it. You know, it's not like you have to rely on creativity 100% of the time. I think sometimes things are very practical. You know, they can progress in a very somewhat methodical or predictable way, but creativity has its place, and it's a necessary ingredient in art. You know, it might not be the ingredient, although it seems like it, but it's a necessary one for sure.
Yeah. I love it, just the sort of what you said about throwing it to the wind, right? It's like, yeah, you don't throw it all to the wind. It's not just whatever, but you have to throw something to the wind.
Yes.
You have to throw something to the wind in order for you to have a even just a hope of something creative to happen. And, you know, a word that I often see that goes alongside creativity is spontaneous as well. You know, creativity is a spontaneous thing. You know, it arises out of the moment. Something else I wanted to mention, too, just as far as this whole thing of ego is concerned, is that, you know, a lot of, and again, I'm just speaking from like the acting world, but I think that there's probably a lot of other artists out there in different fields who've probably heard this sort of little nugget of wisdom that exists within these circles. But one of the big things, like in acting, that teachers will say is like, well, you can't be afraid to make a fool of yourself. That is, whether, you know, the person who said that is aware of it or not, that is a comment about ego. That is completely a comment about ego. You've got to be willing to make a fool of yourself, which is, you know, you got to throw that thing to the wind, you know, like, and you've got to make an idiot out of yourself sometimes. You know, that's the risk that you have to take. That's kind of the cost, you know, that's which was another thing that we had talked about as potentially a title to this episode, was like the cost of creativity. You know, like it asks of something, you know, it has a certain ask from you, a certain sort of surrender, a certain kind of, you know, you've got to relinquish all of your ideas about what this thing is supposed to be, who you are, who you're supposed to be. You've got to let go of some pieces of that thing to discover something. And, you know, if you've ever had this experience out there, and I think that's why this was something you had sort of mentioned, Brandon, was this is maybe why so many people are attracted to the arts, is for this very thing that we're talking about, is because there is this element of ego death that can happen in the arts, where, you know, we say like we lose ourselves, or we disappear into our work, and this sort of thing. Like it's our language implies this loss of ego in this process. And when we kind of look back on those experiences, when we reflect on it, you know, there's this reflection of just being so, there's this blissful quality that comes with that experience, right? Where it's just like, oh yeah, when all sort of self, in a sense, a certain sense of maybe not self-awareness, but I don't know, like this, all thoughts about ourselves kind of give way to whatever the thing is that we're doing, whether we're acting or making music or painting or sculpting or potting or what else, what other art forms are there? There's plenty of art forms, but just like there's this quality that can happen when we're really doing those things, when we're and when we're doing them extraordinarily well. There's no, or at least to a large degree, we lose our sense of selves in the process. There's something about how, and almost meditative, where like your mind becomes almost extremely quiet, and there's just this thing that's happening. There's not you doing the thing anymore. There's just the thing. Hey, it's Evan with a quick public service announcement. If you're enjoying the conversation you're hearing and finding it helpful, then please help us and take a second to subscribe to the podcast. And we can all be people helping other people, and that's awesome. Now back to the show.
Yeah. When you're fully doing something, you don't really think about yourself because you're so focused and, involved. And, it is truly a great, wonderful place to be so involved into something. Like watching a kid play with toys, fascinating when they're totally just involved in it, right? And I'm not just talking about that situation. That was just an example. But when I was a kid, I used to play with my toys, and, you would almost have to snap me out of a trance because I was so invested into it, investigating, but I was investigating, I suppose.
Yeah, totally.
Story. But what I meant to say is I'm invested in this thing. And I was really like these characters and things that I was creating, and what they were doing. I was just so involved in it. And the Brandon disappeared, because it was kind of irrelevant. It didn't really matter who I was. I was simply in the world, and I didn't really, and this is kind of disappearing into the art, because I didn't need to exist anymore. It wasn't necessary. And it didn't matter. I wasn't doing it because I wanted someone to be impressed with how I played. I was actually playing because I really was playing. And I think there's something about this conversation which is kind of poking up for me, which is like, it's about really doing it, Yeah. And I think sometimes the ego, when you have this kind of anchor to the ego, you kind of know you're not really doing it. And there's a kind of a falsity to it. It's sorry, you're nodding. You're just like, I don't want to get too far off this topic, because I feel like you're going to be able to throw some things in on this, but like by letting yourself disappear, there's a freedom. There's a whole new thing that arises.
Yeah. Oh man. Like it's interesting. Like as the words were coming out, it was just like it was like I was picking up on where you were going before the words came out of your mouth. And I was just like, oh shit. Yes. Oh, but now I'm just trying, like, there was a way that you worded it that was just like, that's so on the nose for me, at least. It just,
on the nose means cliche, Evan, but on point.
It was on point. It was on point, Brandon, or as you would say on occasion, shots fired.
Yeah. Shots fired. Definitely. Hit something.
Yeah, no. What was it? Oh my God. I mean,
I know it's weird.
Talking
it's like,
about play. You're talking about play, and when you're just playing, like it's just there's no sense of yourself in it. Oh yeah, and so that's the problem with ego, is that the ego's always got some sort of ulterior motive that's going on. You're not really doing it. You're not fully doing it when the ego's involved, because the ego's concerned about, how do I look? Are people going to like this? Will people accept me? Will this be brilliant? Will this be shit? Will I, will this, like, it's concerned with all of that stuff. And while all of that stuff is going on, that's all energy. That's all an incredible amount of our physical and mental energy that's going into those thoughts that could be placed on the thing itself. On the real fully doing and investing in what's happening.
You know what it's kind of like? It's like you have an inflatable and you have a hole poked in it. That's kind of what when you're too attached to the ego, it's like air is just leaking from it. It's just like losing its firmness. It's losing something. It's sinking because it doesn't have the buoyancy, right? Like it's like,
Yeah. I love that imagery because it's like, it's like you're really trying, because like no one's denying, like people who get into the arts, you got to be kind of crazy to do that. You got to have a little something crazy to do that. But it's like, and you care about it and you're passionate about it and you really want to do it well. Of course, that kind of goes without saying. But like, I love that image because it's like you got that air pump going and you're just pumping that thing so damn hard. And this thing's just kind of like, it's sort of like poofing up a little bit, but then it's just the air just kind of keeps on seeping in. And it's like, and ultimately you're left with this like half inflated, constantly leaking little inflatable, this whatever the fuck it is. But I love that. I love that image.
You gotta love the analogy, right? I had a big thought about this 2 weekends ago. It really hit me hard. And I mean, this is a lesson I think that I've probably revisited many, many a time over the course of my life. But I was thinking about a lot of things, and this whole need to be liked and this need to be accepted, or this faux need, right? It's part of the problem. The ego wants to try to harness that, right? It wants to figure out how to play the game. It's very much, for a lot of people, their ego becomes about, I know how to get people to kind of accept me, to like me. I know how to get them to not like me. I know how to avoid the things where they will be mad at me or not accept me. And I think with art, you need to kind of, almost disregard that faux need, because this need to be liked is kind of what keeps you attached to the ego, right? This need to be perceived a certain way, this need to, like, what's the word? Like just to design almost your appearance to how, and I think just how people accept you or like you. But the thing is with art, with creativity, if that doesn't matter, you become incredibly free to explore, and you become open to things that are not like, they're not going to limit you, because if you're scared to look bad, you're not going to be willing to be a fool. You're not going to be willing to do the thing that is unacceptable. And I think there's a part of art and creativity which the unacceptable needs to be an option. What is unacceptable, not to say that you will take that option, but the fact that you let it be an option to some degree is an important part of the process. Because if you don't have a lot of options, there's not a lot of creative output. Creativity has many options. And I would argue that the more options you have, and the more options that you see available, and especially the options you see available that others don't, that is what gives you creative freedom and power and ability. You can be controlled when you don't have a lot of options, because people can shut off your pathways. But if you have, all those options and more, and you have options up your sleeve, and you have resilience, and you have things like this, your level of creativity, your level of ability to navigate and find your way through and be dynamic. Not only for an actor is that fascinating to watch, but it's an incredibly great skill as a filmmaker, because you can be like, oh shit, we just lost our location. The light's going down. We're running into all these problems. Our sound operator wants to leave early. It's like, holy shit, what are we going to do? But you start to go like, okay, can that kid hold the boom? Okay, he can. Fucking great. Good enough. Come bring him over here. Okay, can we borrow your gear for the rest of the evening? Look, we'll pay for it. You go do whatever the hell you want to do. We'll give it back to you. Whatever. We're all insured. Just whatever. Yeah. It's like, but you have a certain kind of like way of just saying, let's find a way. You know what I mean? I remember one time, just to give a story, to give context to this, I remember one time we were filming and we had a sound operator on set, and he didn't even work his full day. He didn't even work his full 8 hours. It was like 4 hours in or something like that. And he was like, I don't know, he got in a mood and he's like, I'm out of here. And I remember being like, okay, well, we just lost our sound operator. And, basically people came up to me like, well, what's going on? I said, well, this is what we're at. They're like, okay, who do we know that's a sound operator? And people literally started calling people. And we got another guy to just come on set and do sound for the whole rest of the day, who wasn't even hired on the show. And then he ended up being our guy. But it was like, the amount of kind of creative options that are available when you don't submit to needing to, because I could have gotten embarrassed. I could have been like, oh, I'm fucking the show up, like I didn't do something right, or, or they don't like me. And everybody could have just been a victim, but we all just said, we're doing this, so let's find a way. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think creativity is kind of like that. And in some ways you find almost better things by being creative, because, you're never held for ransom either, which I think is a really important part of creativity. Creativity allows you a certain kind of freedom that without it, you just don't have.
Yeah. That reminds me of a quote that I saw from Sadhguru, which was like, it is better to have a passion than a plan. If you have a passion, the plans will follow. Or something like that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I get the essence of it.
Yeah, because plans will fall apart, right? Plans fall apart all the time. But if you've got a passion, that'll push you through. That gives you the clarity, that gives you the the wherewithal to make something happen. Like exactly what you're talking about, right? Like it's the plan goes to shit, but there's a passion, and the passion finds a way. The passion finds a way to make something happen.
Yeah. And passion is, in some ways, passion is the great eraser of the ego, because when you're passionate enough, you don't worry about yourself so much. You just focus on your passion, and then you don't really need to be so much the ingredient, because without passion, if it's all like, I'm so great, I'm going to do this thing because I'm great. If at any point anything defies that or goes against you being so great, all of a sudden the plan breaks down and it's like, what do you got? But passion, it doesn't really matter who you are. It's like, I'm going to do this. I want to find a way to do it. Like, it doesn't even matter if I'm not enough to do it. I'm going to find the right people. I'm going to find the right way. I'm going to do the right things. I'm going to, and every time you come up against the challenge, you just go, okay, like, what's the way to do this? And I think in some ways there's something so wonderful about being passionate. I mean, I feel that I've had the good fortune of being passionate in my life. I mean, I know you've witnessed that of me, and it is the best state of existence, in my opinion. When you're so connected and so passionate, it's just like life is so rich, because you just have like an underlying kind of like fuel and fire that's just constantly like stoking you to just live and be alive and do. And it's a incredible thing to find something or find a way to express your passion. And I think it's a great shame that so many people missed out on that opportunity, or they never exercise it, or never like were encouraged to go for it, because I think sometimes all someone needs is a little bit of an encouragement. I actually honestly think that sometimes all somebody needs is just to say like, hey, I don't know if you think you can do it, but I think you can. And I want you to try. I think it'd be good if you tried. I think it'd be good if you go for it, and let's see, like, I think you have it in you, I believe in you. And those types of things, those types of comments, they can get someone who maybe just thinks like they're so worried, they're kind of caught in their ego, and they just all of a sudden they break out of it for a moment and they go, maybe I can. And like that, maybe I can, that is abandonment of the ego. It truly is. It truly is. Because if you think about the term, maybe I can, like, right? Or I think I can, that's you for a moment going like, I think, without what limited me before, which is my ego, that I could do it. So you're kind of saying that. You're kind of saying, like, without my attachment to who I think I am, maybe I could find my way, you know?
Yeah.
Everything's got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and definitely like just a little bit of encouragement. And another word that comes up for me is permission.
Oh, yeah.
You know, sometimes it takes somebody for some reason, like even though you never needed it in the first place, but like I've had that experience, you know, where I've had an acting teacher one time, you know, just we were working a scene and I was like, oh, well, you know, I kind of had this impulse. I had this sort of, and then he was just like, do it again. Like he's like, just go, just do it. Just like run it right now. Right. And then at the end of it, I was just like, oh, like, thank you so much. You know, like I was a young actor and praising my teacher as if he had done this for me. And in a way he had an involvement, but he was just, he was just like, he's like, I didn't do anything. I just gave you permission. I just gave you permission to do the thing that was already there. You know, the thing that you sat on, right? That impulse, that feeling, that direction that you sat on. And why did I sit on it? Probably some ego shit. Yeah. Oh, well, this isn't the right thing to do. That could look weird, or, you know, whatever the hell it is, right? And so you don't take action on that impulse. You know, you don't take action on that thing that struck you in the moment, you know, that truth that hits you in the moment, you know, because that's the thing with truth. It's truth is found moment to moment. It's not collected. You know, you don't collect truth and store it in a bottle somewhere. You know, you find it, like in every single moment it's there. And I think that that's also why, you know, this whole thing about this relationship between unknown and creativity and ego and all of that stuff, and truth is a big part of this too. You know, like that's where there's something we might call truth that happens in there as well, right? How can you possibly understand the truth of what you're doing? You know, because that's a big part of the, you know, the artist process in what you're doing. Like it's this constant figuring out and paying attention of like, well, what is this thing right now? You know, and I'll take it away from acting for a moment, you know, because like you can talk about how like moment to moment is so important there. But, you know, I remember watching during at the early stages of the pandemic when things were really in lockdown. My wife and I were addicted to this show called Portrait Artist of the Year. It's this British show where they had brought in all of these terrific artists from the UK to do these portraits, and whoever won got like this big grant and did like this really lovely portrait. So anyhow, it was fascinating to watch all of these artists work in their different mediums and how they're bringing together this picture of this person, but they're constantly checking back in to the canvas and the person in the canvas and the person in the canvas, not just because they were trying to create, you know, an image of, some people created these very realistic images, but others, you know, that's not what they did at all. You know, they were much more expressionist or impressionist, or, you know, with how they approached it. But there is this relationship, almost like this struggle, this give and take, but it was like it was like I was watching them listen to the canvas, you know, of like, what am I seeing here? Is that the thing that I'm seeing in that person there? And if I make one more stroke here, is that going to be too much? Is that, is it too little? Like it's, and you know, that's something where it's like you have kind of, in painting, you have time to sort of sit and meditate on it. But at the same time, there is this kind of immediacy, which I related to as an actor, where it was like, no, you've got to see you've got to listen to what it's telling you, because it will tell you where to go. Like what's appearing before you is telling you where to go if you're paying attention. Right. And there's no ego in that. There's no ego. That's just a kind of a harmonious symbiotic relationship with the thing that you're doing. Yeah.
I like it. I like I like the relationship, and I'm very interested in seeing that show because I don't know if it's still on, but that sounds great.
Oh, we just watched it on YouTube.
All right.
It was just a show that was on YouTube. There's a couple of seasons of it, and it's great. It's really quite wonderful to watch. Highly recommended.
Well, I don't know what else to say because I feel like we kind of got to the point here. I think what we've kind of discovered as we've gone through this whole thing is kind of like how the ego gets in the way. That you need to connect to like a passion, or you need to just get fully involved in whatever it is you're doing. And if you're willing to abandon and kind of let go how you look, if you're liked, if you're accepted, you open yourself up to a new world, a new option, which is the world of creativity, the option of creativity. And so, it's in your best interest, I think, for anybody to just be like, okay, like give it a shot, let's see what happens. And also, I think it's also a great kind of, this conversation has turned out to be a bit of a problem solver too, because if you're stuck, you go like, ask yourself a question. Am I caught in my ego? Am I caught in am I caught in what I'm trying to look like? Am I trying to be liked? Am I trying to be accepted? And then go, okay, well, am I willing to let go of that? And what's the cost of not being willing to let go of it? Those are some questions I might ask myself. And I think that might help me to just kind of get over it, get over myself, and just do the thing, because at the end of the day, as one of my friends pointed out to me the other day, for no other reason than you're worth it.
Yeah.
You're worth it.
Yeah, it's I do think that we've kind of gotten to the crux of this conversation, at least on this day we have.
Yes.
And as always, these things you can always go deeper and further into it. Because this isn't one of those conversations that, hey, here's a hard and fast answer that's universal and fits all sizes. Because it's more about something that we become aware of in our own lives, as you're pointing out, like, hey, is my image getting caught up in this? Do I have and it's not that there aren't ways in which we can confront this stuff. It's you can develop practices and ways of confronting all of that. Like for myself, I have a kind of a little ritual before I go into performance, which is I call it my surrender exercise, where I take, like, before I'm getting close to like where I'm stepping out to perform, I go to a quiet place or whatever, as sort of private a spot as I can go to. And I just close my eyes and I take three clear breaths just to try and like calm my mind down as much as possible. And after those 3 breaths, I say to myself, I surrender 3 times. And it's something I've done for years, and it's a practice of actually just like, I'm in no ambiguous way, I am surrendering my ego as much as I possibly can. I'm like, okay, I'm letting go of all of my ideas about my performance and the scene that's about to happen and how that's supposed to look and what people are supposed to think about it and how people are supposed to and if people are supposed to like it or not going to like it. It's a surrendering of all of that shit, and it's not a perfect process, but it's a process. It's an acknowledgement of it. And I'll just throw out another kind of practical practice as well that I've learned over the years, which a lot of people have probably heard before, but just expose what all those things are. say all those things out loud. What are those things of your ego that are swirling around in your head? Oh, I'm afraid of this. A lot of times it comes out in fears. Fears are usually a good way to spot the ego, and just like, all right, I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid that people will. I'm afraid that, you just run through the list of all the things that are going on to expose them. And for a lot of people, that's super helpful, right? You can say them out loud. You can journal them, that kind of thing. But these are just a couple of ways, I guess, on a practical level of how we can begin to work with it, begin to change our relationship to our egos and their involvement in our creativity. Yeah.
I like that. Well, I mean,
I have
a few more thoughts. Maybe I'll share here at the end, but let's talk about the beer and then wrap it up if you want.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm down for that.
All right. Well, I'll go first. Mine is from Four Winds Brewery.
Oh, I love Four Winds.
This is called Elementary Lager. I think I might have had this one before, or one of us did at least at some point in the show, but it's good. It's just solid, nice little, it's a nice little lager, and it's real warm today, and that's why I went for it. And I couldn't be happier, Evan. Couldn't be happier at all.
Well, I'm also having a lager. It's just a lager kind of a day, I guess. Mine is this is one I've had on before. It's from a local brewery. And it was a growler fill, so I was like, "Oh, I've got to drink this because it's been in the fridge for a couple of days, and you got a growler, you got to drink it." This is from Tapworks Brewing in Gibsons, BC, and this is their Crispy Boy, spelled Buoy. Crispy Boy. And it's delicious. It's a terrific lager. I love it. So
yeah, I think I've had that one. I'm pretty sure I liked it. All right. Well, look, I mean, I really liked the way this conversation went and what it opened up, and it gave me some more clarity. I would say that, my final thought on all of this is I think that courage and bravery are really important things, because it takes courage to be yourself. It takes courage to not need to be liked, to not need to be accepted. It takes courage to face your fears and do it anyway. And I really honestly, I don't think anybody should give in to fear. I don't think you should do anything out of fear. I think that, there may be a few rare moments where fear can save your life. But other than that, I really don't think it's a good guide. I don't think it's a good place to make decisions from. I think it's a mistake. I think it will lead you down a bad path, and I think you'll find that out if you follow it too far. So I would say the sooner that you nip that in the bud, the sooner that you decide, I will not let fear run my life, you find out what you're made of. You find out that there's so much more in you. You can call that bravery, you can call it courage. In some ways it is, but you don't have to erase the feeling of fear, but do the opposite of it. Get in the mentality of, I feel fear and fear is telling me to do this, so I know to do the opposite. Train your mind, train yourself. And what you're going to find out, and I know this from personal experience, is that it's not as scary as you think. It's really not that bad. And if you just went towards it, you'd realize that this big bad monster is actually not anything to be afraid of. And you'll actually ask yourself, why was I ever scared of that? Why did I ever even run from that? It's nothing. And every time you face a little monster that seems so big to you at the time, you will be able to face a bigger monster, and that monster will become little. And I think when it comes to creativity is a scary idea. It means go into the unknown, go into the darkness, go up to the monster and look at it. That's what it means in a lot of ways. And I think if you're willing to do that, I think there's great reward on the other side. I think you're going to find out that there's stuff inside of you. You're made of something incredible. And I dare you to go find out what that is. I implore you to do it. I think that in all scenarios, if you just look fear in the face and you decide that you're going to be okay, fear will back down. You're better than fear. You truly are. There's so much more into you than what you're scared of. And most of your fears you're going to discover are irrational, and they're silly, and they're nonsense. And you're going to go from being essentially a child who's scared of the dark to being a warrior that can go out into the wilderness, that can go into the metaphorical forest of life and explore and navigate and find out something incredible, and go to most places that people will never, ever be able to visit because they're just too afraid to venture out there.
Oh, man. Bringing fear into this whole equation at the end. I'm glad it made its appearance because it's an important one.
Yeah.
I'll piggyback off of those fantastic closing comments. The ego is very much comprised of fears. It's pride, and with pride comes fear, which is another. But let's not go down that rabbit hole too much. And real creativity is this expansive thing. It requires expansion, which means treading out into something that's unknown, that goes out beyond what you know, beyond what you've experienced, it just means beyond something. Whereas, with ego and fear, it's not expansive, it's reclusive. It's a reclusive reaction as opposed to an expansive response. And I guess maybe I'll just finish with that, like that question: which of those is the option when you think of it in those terms? Do you want to be a recluse, or do you want to expand? Do you want to be expansive? Seems like a pretty simple choice to me. Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.